Hi, everyone. Welcome to Networking 101, Introverts Only. Not really if you're an extrovert. I hope you also stick around. As I've been listening to the other presentations, something that's been mentioned several times, like David said, is the value and importance of networking. So I'm incredibly honored and thrilled to be speaking at my first SANS Summit. This is my generic title, but what I really do is work on the threat intelligence team at Cardinal Health. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. I do have screen control. There we go. We're good. We'll begin with a brief introduction. Talk about what exactly it means to be an introvert and some of our strengths. Then we'll dive into how we can effectively network, walk through a case study of a recent event I attended, and wrap it up with a couple notes for our extroverted attendees. Ultimately, I have 3 goals for this presentation. Number 1, increase our self-awareness and celebrate our uniqueness. Number 2, strategize techniques to leverage our personalities when we network. And number 3, then use some of these techniques so we can challenge ourselves to expand our network, thereby increasing our opportunities. A little bit about me personally, I love anything outdoors. I live in Colorado and enjoy hiking, skiing, visiting national parks. I enjoy reading, playing board games with my 4 kids. Professionally, I'm fairly new to security, probably like many of you. Most of my career has actually been in finance and risk management. However, I wanted to pivot and was fortunate to be selected for one of the SANS Diversity Cyber Academies and will actually be facilitating my first academy cohort this summer. And that's actually how I came up with the idea for this presentation. As I was starting to prepare materials and go through my SANS study process, tips for resumes, job hunting, organizations to join, and really start to document my process and methodologies, I realized that I also had a pretty methodical way to manage networking, which may sound odd to the extroverts in the room, but I think as we walk through this discussion, it will make a little more sense. Quick disclaimer, I'm not a psychologist. This talk is based largely upon my personal experience as a lifelong introvert. And just to put that in perspective on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most introverted, I would probably place myself around an 8.5, 9. And also there's probably a lawyer somewhere I should have checked with before doing this. So I'll just add that this does not represent the opinions of Cardinal Health. Some of this slide is meant to be pretty funny, but I think what makes it so hilarious is that there's actually a lot of truth to it. And unless you know me pretty well, I don't think people initially realize how introverted I am. And unfortunately, I think that's due to a lot of misconceptions people have about us as introverts. For example, I think I do pretty well socially. I actually genuinely love people. And in fact, would say working with people across the business is my favorite part of my job. What being introverted really means is that we are just not energized by people. For the extroverts listening, that may be difficult to comprehend, but being alone gives us energy, unlike you who are fueled by being around people. Oh no. Let me go back a little bit. There we go. And the last 2 images are just pretty funny, but highlight a couple important points we'll hit on later in the presentation. But let's move on to some of our strengths. As we talk about these, I think it's really important to think about some of our natural capabilities and how we can leverage them to network rather than trying to fundamentally change who we are. I propose that we will be much more successful in networking if we live within our strengths and become intentional and strategic in our interactions. One strength pretty typical to a lot of introverts is our ability to be active, engaged listeners. We could probably spend a whole session discussing active listening, but this graphic is just a reminder of how we can really hone in on that natural ability. For me, this comes fairly easily. Like I said, I enjoy people. I like others to feel valued. I am genuinely interested in what others feel the need to share. So I ask questions. I try to show interest with my body language. So these are just 7 points that serve as good reminders to help us refine that natural capability. Our next strength valuable to networking is that we are excellent at observing nonverbal clues. Many of us are naturally attentive. My theory on this one is that many of us have actually fine-tuned this ability because we seek to avoid attention. For example, in school, I was kind of the kid who always knew the answers, but I was the master of never being called on. I knew exactly where to sit in each class, whether or not to make eye contact with the teacher and what behavior that might prompt. I knew my teacher's nonverbal cues really well, so much so that I could conveniently tie my shoe or rifle through some papers or come up with some other distraction when I suspected a teacher was thinking about calling on me. And this skill can really help us navigate a room and conversations really well, though. We're probably not going to get much value from trying to network with someone who seems irritated. We might have better luck moving on to someone who appears interested and engaged in conversations, or maybe we spot someone with a sweatshirt of a sports team we're also a fan of. Little things like that can help us feel more comfortable and relate to people easily. The third strength I want to touch on is our ability to think critically and thoughtfully. This can really prove to be quite handy as we prepare for networking, as well as the actual networking. We tend to be pensive, often careful to think before we speak and do. And this can obviously help us make our interactions meaningful and help us avoid putting our foot in our mouths. So those are just a few of our natural strengths that I think can help us as we talk about preparing to build our network. There are a few things that we really need to discuss before we can most effectively network, though. Number one, we need to make sure we are self-aware, that we as introverts understand our limitations and recognize them before others. For example, there has been a time or two, maybe 3 or more, where my children suggest I go outside for a few minutes because they know that's what I need. We don't want to get to that point when we're trying to establish professional relationships. People sensing that isn't a great approach. And that brings me to my next point. Know what fuels you and prioritize it, whatever it is. For me, I need to be outside or work out every single day by myself. And finally, don't feel guilty about it. It took me a really long time to realize this. I think as a mama, we tend to want to prioritize the care of those around us over ourselves, but taking care of ourselves really allows us to more effectively manage the relationships around us. Now that we've discussed what it means to be introverted, some of our strengths, and the pre-work, we can actually go network. So there are 2 places we can network. The first being online, hands down the easiest. It's great because you have complete control. You can turn it on and off at your leisure. It's easy to make it meaningful, yet manageable. And I would encourage you to focus on that. Focus on the quality over the quantity so you don't get overwhelmed. It's really easy to connect, follow, whatever, depending on the platform. But I would encourage you to make it a little more meaningful than that to effectively network. For example, if I had attended a SAN summit and wanted to connect with one of the presenters, I might say, "Hey, Jess, thanks so much for speaking. It's really nice to know I'm not the only introvert." Or, "Hey, thanks for pointing me to the SANS Diversity Cyber Academy," a little plug there. "I didn't even know that existed. I'd love to connect with you." That's it. Super simple, but don't underestimate it by putting in 0 effort. It can be really powerful and over time lead to some meaningful relationships. I actually have several friends that I've never met in person that started with just that simple step. The next opportunity for networking, however, is not so simple. And that's in person. But I have 3 strategies that are tried and true to make it a little easier. And I've called them birds of a feather, hitch your wagon, and play a game. And for some reason, the names just made me think of Oregon Trail. But I promise you that if you try these tactics, in-person networking will be much more pleasant. The first one, birds of a feather. This is the one I find the least intimidating. You enter an event slowly, remain on the fringe for a bit, scan the room, and find your people. We already know that we're observant, so let's use that to find the other introverts in the room and approach them. We already know we have something in common, so it's an easy way to make a couple new connections. The next strategy, hitch your wagon. This is the one I find the most challenging, but also by far the most productive. Start the same way as you would with birds of a feather, but this time find that one person. And there might be several of these people, but just pick one. We all know who they are. They're easy to spot. I'm a little envious of them. They're kind of the people that are the life of the party, super social, often excited, really exaggerated gestures, maybe engaged in conversation with several people at once. If you're not sure who to pick, you could even ask someone. Maybe there's someone at the registration table or a greeter. It's no big deal to just say, hey, is there someone here I should try and meet? I'm pretty new. But just pick your person, then take a deep breath and hold on. Once you muster up the courage for this, you've done all of the work. And if you find that right person, just introduce yourself, tell them you don't know anyone, but you're looking forward to meeting others. And then they will do all the work for you. They will love being your connector. They'll introduce you to others, encourage you to try new things, go here, do this. They will basically do all of your networking for you. You just kind of have to tag along. Often I find that these people already know the key people in the room, so you get a lot of bang for your buck with this strategy. The final strategy is play a game. This allows you to shift your focus from a single task or to a single task from focusing on so many people, which can be overwhelming to us. And if you're a parent, you probably do this all the time with your children and may not even think about it. For example, earlier this week, we were in Utah hiking, and there was one particular morning we wanted to get up and be somewhere at sunrise, which involved a 20-minute drive and then hiking a few miles. So if we had told our kids, hey, we're going to get up at 5 o'clock and then go hike a few difficult miles so we can look at a rock, that would not have received much enthusiasm. So what we did was we made a game out of it. We made it fun. We broke it down into small tasks. We're going to be the first ones to breakfast. We're going to try and get through the gates first. Let's hike in the dark with flashlights and climb this rock, and we'll race here. When you do that, when you're networking, it makes things so much easier. But you have to choose a game that naturally leads to connections. For example, one I use, and if you Google this, you'll find all kinds of articles on it, is the Marriott 15-5 rule. And if you've ever visited a Marriott hotel or an event there, when you come within 15 feet of an employee, they're required to acknowledge you with either eye contact, a friendly nod, or some other gesture. And then when you come in within 5 feet, they smile and say hello. It's really simple, an easy way to invite interaction. And oftentimes they'll reciprocate and start a conversation. And if not, it's not awkward, just to smile and be friendly and say hi to people. Okay, so next, let's chat about what some of these look like in real life by walking through how I navigated a recent in-person event from start to finish, where I knew no one. We just moved to Colorado in June, so I literally know no one here. We'll take the strategies we discussed and insert them into this larger framework that includes preparation, strategy, key targets, and most importantly, our escape plan. Preparation. For a couple of these skills, for a couple of these steps, put those OSINT skills to work. Find out the agenda, drive around the venue. This was especially important to me since I'm relatively new. So I actually prefer to use Google Earth just to walk around the venue. Make sure you know what the objective of the event is. If it's a recurring event or hosted by a really active organization, check out social media for photos so you kind of know what to expect. Familiarize yourself with the agenda. This particular event was a buffet dinner with a vendor presentation, and then the organization's officers spoke, followed by what they called fun and entertainment, which included bowling, yard games, and some bumper car game I had actually never heard of. And this was the return to in-person events for this group. So they were hoping to reconnect old members and then gain a few new members. And this doesn't have to take a lot of time, but for me, spending just 10 to 15 minutes really helps me feel more comfortable and better prepared to network. The next step is to develop your strategy. Have a plan, but also be prepared to be flexible, because as we know, the best laid plans don't always come to fruition. And for me, that was arriving on time. I did not want to arrive a minute earlier for this event. And given that it was dinner first, I had planned on slipping in after most people had arrived. So I could kind of sit back and get the lay of the land and start with birds of a feather. I wanted to ease in, so I decided I'd find some other introverts and try to join them for the dinner portion. This was a long event, so I wanted to make sure I could survive the whole thing. I had planned on utilizing that dinner time to scope the room so I could next leverage hitch your wagon. Again, my favorite strategy. And another key component to strategy is having a couple go-to icebreaker questions that you can ask anyone. My favorite is, do you know anyone here? And I think it's great because if they don't, you immediately have common ground. And if they do, that's also great because then it's super easy to follow up and say, hey, I don't know anyone here. I'd love for you to introduce me to a couple of people. These are typically questions that can be used for every event. So again, you're not spending a ton of time to effectively network. You're just being really strategic. Once I had a general strategy, birds of a feather followed by hitch your wagon, I tried to identify a couple key attendees and do some more recon work. Maybe you find out a little bit about the person handling registration or a little bit more about the organization's leadership or the vendor sponsoring the event. Just know enough to increase your comfort level and have some immediate common ground if you run into one of these individuals. Lastly, but super important, find just one of these individuals to thank at some point for the work they did, their sponsorship, etc. Expressing gratitude is another way to meaningfully connect with very little effort. A sincere thank you for hosting or thanks for getting this set up is generally all you need to start a conversation. The recipient is usually pretty quick to engage in conversation when they feel appreciated. And even if they don't start a conversation, that interaction can still be really impactful. And that's what I did. I knew who the membership officer was, so I thanked her for the work she did, told her how much fun I had, and that I looked forward to attending the regular membership meetings. So not only did I express gratitude, but she walked away from our interaction knowing that her efforts resulted in the intended goal of attracting new members. So I would imagine she felt pretty good. And I intentionally sought her out at the end of the evening, so she left on a high note, and that she remembered me. So when I tried to connect with her later, she knew who I was. So I did my prep work, developed a quick strategy, became familiar with a few key people. Now I just needed my escape plan. And this is where self-awareness really comes into play. If you feel yourself rapidly depleting, go ahead and execute the plan. Don't hang around any longer. But I would first encourage you to have a goal you want to achieve before dipping out. Maybe it's stay till a certain time, or you've met X number of people. Giving myself a goal tends to keep me from trying to escape prematurely and miss out on really great opportunities. For this particular event, I had decided I was going to play the family card because it was true. being honest always feels better to me, but just have a few escape statements so it's easy to dip out and you're not caught off guard if you're trying to quietly sneak out and someone catches you. But a couple of my favorites are, it was really great to meet you. I'm going to go home for some family time. Again, no one can really argue with you tending to your family. Or for those of you with babies and little ones, when I was in that stage of life, I always used bedtime and nap time as an excuse to leave events. Another good one is I have another commitment, but I was so glad to be able to make it to part of whatever networking event you're at, because that one's vague enough that it's always true. They don't have to know that the commitment may simply be your sanity. Also, people have lots of people have dogs, so that's another great excuse to get out. Everyone understands the need to let them out. So those are just some easy, widely accepted reasons you could use. Just pick a couple and be prepared to use them. And when you leave, regardless of how you feel it went, just celebrate the fact that you showed up and then be done with it. Don't overthink it. Don't analyze every little detail, because I promise you no one else is. But do follow up online with anyone you met. This is a great way to quickly solidify new contacts in an introvert friendly way. A simple connection on LinkedIn goes really far. And even if you didn't get to meet them in person, but you know who some of the attendees were, it's okay to reach out to them afterwards and say, sorry, I missed you and really enjoyed the event. Maybe we'll meet another time. And for our extrovert friends, I have not forgotten about you. Thank you for making it this far. I sincerely believe the world needs both of us. Our strengths are complementary, but I do have a couple of tips for you. Encourage us. Sometimes we really need a little push, but also don't make us decline your events or suggestions 100 times. Maybe 2, 3, or even 5 times is okay. But if we're saying no more than that, we probably just don't have the capacity for whatever you're proposing. Sometimes we just can't. And I know that seems crazy to those of you who are really extroverted, but as you now know, being around people has the opposite effect on us. We recharge by being alone. Also, another tip, if we are ever at an event and disappear, please don't call us out on it when we return. We really appreciate being able to sneak off, recharge, and return quietly to the event, ready to finish strong. And most importantly, thank you. Thank you for being you and seeking us out, challenging us, and sometimes just letting us hitch our wagon to you guys. When that's really all we have the energy for. We sincerely appreciate it. And just for fun, I did a little Googling and read through a Reddit post where someone had posed this question. What are some of the things we really wish extroverts would understand? There's some really good responses. There were hundreds, but here's just a few of them. My absolute favorite is, you have never seen joy like the joy of an introvert who suddenly finds out that plans are canceled and they don't have to go anywhere. I'm sure lots of you in this room can relate to that. But let's recap. It's okay to be introverted. The world needs both introverts and extroverts and everything in between. I realize that's a continuum. I think it's great to always work on developing and strengthening on other aspects of our personality, but just not to the extent that we forget to really lean into our strengths and live where we can really shine. Before we even start expanding our network, make sure we're self-aware, understand what fuels us, and don't feel guilty about it. Then when we get to networking, revel in the ease of online, and don't forget the 3 strategies we discussed for in-person networking. Birds of a feather, my personal favorite, hitch your wagon, and play a game. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found something really helpful in this. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I am sincerely happy to help, especially those of you who are new to the field or trying to enter the field. It's not too long ago that I was in your shoes. So please reach out. I'd be thrilled. I've linked a few resources for you, some just for fun. The presentation will be in the SANS portal. I'll probably try and post them in the hallway too, and I'll be hanging out there for a while. I think that's a wrap, David.